Are
we on?
We are live.
We are live.
Hi. Hello, everyone.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Kyle Beltran. I'm an actor and activist based in New York. My pronouns are he, him, his.
And I'm Nicole Lewis, and I am an actor, professor of acting based in New York City and Emerson College in Boston. And my pronouns are she, her, hers.
And Nicole and I are members of the Commissary Theater Collective, which is the company that is bringing you Lessons in Survival at the Vineyard Theater. If this is your first time joining us, tonight is a community conversation with some brilliant guest artists around themes that we've been exploring and discussing as a company with Lessons in Survival. Lessons in Survival is a digital theatrical series where our company members perform dialogues, texts, conversations, speeches, mostly from the first civil rights movement, with an in-ear technique where we have a feed playing the material in our ear and we perform it directly as we hear it and do our best to channel it as we hear it. The best part of the Commissary is that we meet weekly to have discussions on themes of race and civics and social justice and artistry and the intersection of artistry and activism. And we get in deep, we make space to heal and discuss and laugh and cry together and strategize. And so our effort is to bring that part of our work to you guys tonight. So we have an amazing group of people here. I'm so excited about it. Immediately following this conversation will be the next episode of Lessons in Survival. I think we're going to bring the info right up here on the screen for you. It's episode 6, This Country's My Problem and Your Problem, tonight at 8:30. $9 tickets are available. The Vineyard website is right there. You can also still buy an all-access pass, which gets you access to all the material that we've made and presented so far. But before we do that, we are going to kick it off with a little live in-ear work, kind of an open rehearsal right now.
Yes. We tonight we are exploring a conversation. See, I got my notes. I had to have my notes together. But we do this every week in our play group, and it's really exciting. Tonight we're exploring a conversation. It was a writer's roundtable discussion about a Negro in American culture, and we've got Reggie White playing James Baldwin, and there he is. Hi, Reggie. Yay. We've got our very own Kyle Beltran right here playing Langston Hughes. We've got Kaylin Coleman playing Lorraine Hansberry in this conversation. And we have all of our very own. These are our theater company members. We've got Marin Ireland playing Alfred. Yes, that's right, Alfred Kazin. And it's really very exciting. So this is all a part of our work. It's in real time. They're going to be listening to this conversation and giving it to you. So I will count everybody in if you're all ready. Yeah. Thumbs up if you're ready. Okay. And 1, 2, 3, click.
Do you think, as a writer, as a very good writer, do you think it's necessary to understand something in order to create a good character? Is understanding in the deepest human civic sense, the brotherly sense, is this really necessary to artistic creation?
I think to create a believable character, certainly you have to have a certain amount of understanding. This character became so unreal to me.
Yes, I agree with you about that character, but I think that Dilsey, who's also a Negro and who was also a character who was causing me the deepest pain and chagrin if I were a Negro, nevertheless, I do submit, is a great creation.
Oh, yes, I don't doubt that.
You can't understand one Negroes on one page and not on another. I mean, understanding's only always been the same. It's a typical understanding of Faulkner, which is not so hard on an artistic level. But as a writer, once in a while, something is created which comes out of a deepest, most unconscious sense of love. Let me give you an example of this here. The fourth part of The Sound and the Fury opens, you remember, with Dilsey coming out of on the porch. And he portrays her in a typical hand-me-down costume of a woman who's worked for 50 years for this Rodden family, the Compsons. The costume itself is demeaning, as everything else. But that description itself, everything about her, everything there is of such an extraordinary artistic beauty that I can never read the thing without being moved to tears because of the sheer intensity. The thing has been made flesh, and she is there. We know it. Something very different, I submit, from 101, moralizings and whatnot, for example, that you might get from people who live in the North and whatnot. I'm saying this for one page there, and many pages in the book. He really created a human being, and even when he sees her without understanding in his mind, he says with tremendous understanding in his heart.
Yeah, well, and I think another great white Southern writer is Carson McCullers.
I just
well, I think she's created a unbelievable.
I'm sorry.
Well, because you see, I think what you are perhaps doing, Mr. Kaysen, is imposing on my remarks before, if I may say so, a lack of dimension that wasn't there. In other words, what I was trying to say is exactly the opposite of what you paid attention to. That is that we are not concerned, or perhaps I better say I am not concerned, with doing away with the mere paraphernalia, traditional paraphernalia of the inexpressive, crude Negro character. That is not the point. I very arbitrarily, very deliberately thought and intentioned, chose to write, for instance, and I come from the Negro middle class, about the Negro working class, deliberately so. I feel sources of life within this familiar, which doesn't yet interest me in terms of Negro middle class life. Eventually, I think more of our writers are going to deal with the Negro middle class, which most people don't even know exist. But we're not trying to escape from some image of truth. When you spoke earlier, you said somehow that would this satisfy us somehow if the image were more glossy or dressed up or something. That is not the point. And to the extent that language is handled truly, Negro speech is handled with fidelity, which doesn't just have to do with the dropping of G's and the misplacing of verbs. To the extent that the substance, the essence of character becomes true and as complicated as characters should be, whoever you're talking about, this begins to be closer to what we are talking about. There is a comedy line, you read for me in my piece. There's a comedy line in my play, which was written for comedy, where on another subject, the young daughter says to one of her suitors, you think thus and so forth about women because this is what you got from all the novels that men have written. When I would note, I feel, as a woman who has written novels, that men have created some substantial female characters in literature. But I am altogether certain that the greater the permeation of inner truths of character, the greater the woman character will be from a man writer, and that as women read it, even though I'm afraid they, like Negroes, accept an awful lot of images that come from literature about themselves and then start to act those roles, that there are other truths which have to do with studying people in depth. You mentioned Carson McCullers. There's a scene in Member of the Wedding when the young Negro nephew of Bernice is being chased by a lynch mob. And she takes the young white boy who she has nursed his life. And he's about to die. I think he's got trouble with himself. And this woman's preoccupation is with that child. Now, the point is that I happen to think that was a lovely play. And I happen to believe Bernice's character. But these extra nuances that we are talking about now is something I am prepared to say that the intimacy of knowledge, which the Negro may culturally have of white Americans, does not exist in the reverse. That we...
That's absolutely true. That's absolutely
no. Now,
absolutely true.
So that William Faulkner has never in his life sat in on a discussion in a Negro home. True.
Exactly.
He has never heard the nuances of hatred, of total contempt from his most devoted servant and his most beloved friend, who means every word when she's telling it to him. and who will express to him profoundly intimate things, but he has never heard the truth of it. It is physically impossible.
Yes.
So that I am saying that for you, this is a fulfilling image, because you haven't either. I can understand that. I am saying, however, that I am sure that the other dimension of this person, without discussing talent, of course, Faulkner is a monumental talent. I would be remiss to take that away. But in this instance, I would create that character, or how would Jim or Langston would. There has to be a world of difference. And it is this thing that we're trying to get through.
Yes. I'm sorry.
I think you're all literary chauvinists.
No, I don't see that. No,
I want white writers to create Negro characters.
But the point Lorraine made, though, is that is a very important point. Coming back to the issues about Faulkner, the character created by Faulkner, or by Carlson McCullers, or it's an absolutely incredible moment, as Lorraine points out, when this woman's nephew is being chased by a lynch mob and she's worried about the little boy. Now, this doesn't reveal anything about the truth of Negro life, but it reveals a great deal about the state of mind of what white Southern woman who wrote it.
Yes.
And what my objection, quite a powerful, apart from all of this, the thing I will not settle for is that this image is created. Southerners have an illusion and they cling to it desperately. And not only Southerners, the whole American Republic does. These characters come out of a compulsion. This Dulcie, let us say, is Faulkner's truth. That the Negroes who had worked for nothing, who were lynched and burned and stolen and mobbed, etc., for generations, had forgiven him. That the reason the walls in the South, the reason the panic is so great that the walls can come down is when the walls come down, the truth will come out. And it's perfectly true, as Lorraine says, that if you have not sat, all Negroes together, if you've not listened, to Dulcie at home, my mother, who says what she says about the people she works for, and what is more important than that, not only what she says, what she knows, and she knows much more about them than they will ever know about her, and it's a very good reason for this. Maybe Faulkner's never sat in a Negro kitchen, and while the Negroes are talking about him. But we have been sitting around for generations in kitchens and everywhere while everybody talks about us. And this creates a very great difference. It also creates, for not sort of speaking specifically from the Negro writer, a very great advantage. I was living abroad in France, and someone said to me something for some reason struck this nerve. It's something the French say all the time. But this day she said to me, it rang a bell. He said, if you want to know what's happening in a house, ask the maid. And it occurred to me, in this extraordinary house, I'm the maid. I'm the maid.
Which is a different relationship, because the employer doesn't go to the maid's house. People try to get confused. They think that the alienation is equal on both sides, and it isn't. We have been washing everybody's underwear for 300 years, and we know when you're not clean.
Thank you all. That was amazing.
Thank you for lending us your time and talents.
Yes,
Thank y'all.
And wash your underwear.
When you're not clean. Well, we have some incredible guests tonight to continue this conversation with us. First up, we've got Ms. Claudia Rankin, and incredible author. She's the author of 6 collections of poetry, including her extraordinary new book, Just Us, An American Conversation, and 3 plays, including Help, which premiered in March 2020 at the Shed, New York City, and numerous video collaborations. She's also the co-editor of several anthologies, including The Racial Imaginary, Writers on Race in the Life of the Mind, which includes an essay by Casey Llewellyn, who will also be joining us tonight. And in 2016, Claudia co-founded the Racial Imaginary Institute, Among her numerous honors and awards, Rankin is the recipient of the Bobbitt National Prize for Poetry and the Poets and Writers Jackson Poetry Prize, and many prestigious fellowships. She is currently teaching at Yale. Please welcome Claudia Rankin. Thank you for joining us, Claudia.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
Thanks. So next we have Casey Llewellyn. She is a playwright, writer, and theater and dance artist whose work integrates identity and interrogates identity, collectivity, and form. Her works include many plays, including the celebrated O Earth, which was commissioned and produced by the Foundry Theater in 2016, as well as performance pieces and essays, including What Could We Do with Writing? And a collaboration with our Claudia Rankin tonight titled Theater of Intimacy and Abandon. I also co-wrote the play Existing Conditions together. Casey has an MFA from Brown, was a 2019 fellow at the Playwright Center, as well as a founding member of the Racial Imaginary Institute with Claudia. She also has a coaching practice. She works with artists committed to aligning their lives with their values, and I know I can get behind that. Welcome and thank you, Casey, for joining us tonight.
Thank you so much for having me. It's really an honor to be here.
It's our honor. Thank you. It's a pleasure. And our third guest joining us is Mr. Michael R. Jackson. He's a playwright and composer and winner of the 2020 Pulitzer Prize for Drama for his musical, A Strange Loop, for which he wrote the book, music, and lyrics. New meaning to Triple Threat. Strange Loop also won the 2020 Drama Desk Award for Outstanding Musical. He holds a BFA and MFA from NYU Tisch in playwriting and musical theater. And he wrote the lyrics and co-wrote the book for the musical adaptation of the horror film Teeth with Anna K. Jacobs. And he's an artist in residence at the Vineyard Theater this season. And he's developing his new musical, White Girl in Danger. He's the recipient of numerous awards, including a Whiting Award and Jonathan Larson Grant, and is the 2020-21 Dramatists Guild Fellow. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, Michael.
Hi, it's so lovely to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you all.
We really are thrilled to have you guys here, and it's such a beautiful mirroring of the clip we just watched with a bunch of writers sort of around the table hashing it out. Really, really curious to pick your brains, and so I'm going to dive right in a little bit. All of you work with the issues of identity in your work. You're all exploring race directly and indirectly. You are all exploring whiteness as a construct in some capacity. Casey, your O Earth sort of expands to include some marginalized voices into our town, which is a sort of very traditional kind of something from the American canon, traditionally white. Michael, in your musical A Strange Loop, we're literally inside the psyche of your queer Black protagonist. And Claudia, for one example, I think of Help, which has a Black female narrator actively investigating and exploring her conversations with white men, those who are strange to her and also those who are very close, including her husband. So I'm really curious, I guess, first, to hear about your exploration of identity through your work, what it's like to sort of excavate those things, and also what it's like to inhabit other characters, create other characters who might be existing in categories of identity that you don't share, as we sort of heard them discuss a little bit in the last conversation. Anybody?
To jump in.
I guess I'll go. I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yes. I'm just curious about your experience writing sort of about your own identity in the theater, and also how it relates to creating characters for people who might inhabit other identities.
Okay. Well, I guess like the only way I can really find my way into that is just to sort of preface it by saying, I always tell people that I'm from a Black family. I grew up in a Black city. I went to Black schools. I went to Black churches. I did Black social groups. The first boys I kissed were Black. The first boys I had sex with were Black. Like my consciousness very much comes out of that, as does my creativity and artistry sort of emerges from that world. And so when I put pen to paper, ever since I first started writing, short stories as like a middle schooler and then a high schooler, like the world was Black to me. It wasn't that I didn't understand that there wasn't like a dominant white world or whatever, but that just wasn't what I was raised up in, and that wasn't what I was mostly absorbing. And so my output came from that. And so when but then when I left that Detroit, which is where I'm from, and then moved to New York to study playwriting at NYU, I then go from Black world into the melting pot. And in the melting pot, in the university, in the arts programs and whatnot, I had to sort of do a little bit of a shift. But the thing of it is, my roots were still very deeply in where I came from. And so I just had to learn how to do like a second thing, which is think about whiteness or non-Blackness and incorporate that into my work if it called for it. But it didn't always call for it, because when I default to the page, my default is usually always Black. And so so like that was like what most of my writing has been for the most part, over during the course of my career, culminating in A Strange Loop specifically. Now, my other musical piece that I'm working on, White Girl in Danger, is a very specific exploration of, in some sense, what is Black consciousness, but also what is whiteness? Because I think that we take whiteness for granted, and I don't. Like, I never have. Like, it is a thing that, to me, I can define and stereotype. And, like, the White Girl in Danger is very much a piece about white stereotypes. And exploring what that is inside of Black consciousness. But that all being said, I guess I approach all of the characters that I write with as much integrity as I can bring to them. So even though in White Girl in Danger, you're watching these sort of soap opera stereotypically white women and men, I still think that there's an integrity within that and within them that I try to bring to it, because they're part of like an overall story that I'm trying to sort of convey that has to do with the nature of Black consciousness. So I don't know if that's like a long answer, but that's sort of how I approach it.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Does anybody else have anything to jump in?
I can jump in.
Just how they approach their work in terms of, from the perspective of their investigating their own identity or others' identities.
So the same question?
Sure. Or
oh, I'm sorry. Did I miss something? Oh, I was just going to talk about just like my relationship to identity in my own work. Yeah, and I feel like I first started writing around identities that I was originally politicized around. So like very focused on like telling women's stories, like, and just being a very autobiographical writer, like just really writing from my positionality as a woman and a queer person. And writing from all my other positionalities, right, as a class privileged person, as a white person, in an unaware way. And so I feel like a journey that I've been on is how to make the identities that were shaping my work unconsciously, and obviously like cisgenderedness as well, like how to make those more conscious, and to really like understand how whiteness is shaping my work, and how to make conscious statements around whiteness, class, in ways that I wasn't really tracking what the journey of those kind of the representation around those parts of my identity were in earlier work. And also just trying to, in terms of writing characters with whom I don't share like marginalized identities, just trying to stay in relationship in my collaborations and in my life with people who can weigh in on those representations. Because I'm clear that like I'm not going to be paying the price for bad representations or kind of harmful or inaccurate or like things that are missing in my work. Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah. So I think in my case, I don't think I started out thinking about, I mean, obviously I think about race, but in terms of writing, I think about intimacy and you know, in the clip that you did, the enactment that you did before the reading, you talk about, or Lorraine Hansberry talked about the intimacy of knowledge. And so I'm really interested in how we get to know each other. And her argument, Hansberry's argument was that white writers can't know Black people because they're not intimate with them. And so as you all were talking, and Michael was talking about Black consciousness as it's informed by white stereotypes, and Casey was talking about having a queer feminist orientation as the generating drive into the making of work. I thought of this quote by Frantz Fanon where he says, "As soon as I desire, I am asking to be considered. I am not merely here and now, sealed into thingness. I am for somewhere else and for something else. I demand that notice be taken of my negating activity insofar as I pursue something other than life, insofar as I do battle for the creation of a human world. That is a world of reciprocal recognitions." And so I feel like when I go into work, that's what I'm trying for. I'm trying to create kind of reciprocal recognitions between people, and sometimes people of different races. So the question is, how intimate can you get in order to create the reciprocity that creates the recognition of a human world?
Beautiful. That's beautiful. Yeah, I'm you know, as I'm listening to you speak, you know, one of the great values of the work we've been doing is investigating so many artists and their approach to the work, and also making space for all of the diversity of experience and opinions. Because I think one of the sort of insidious things that racism does is that it sort of robs people, can rob people of their individuality and sort of make Black people a monolith. And I was listening, you know, Michael, to you talk about having the experience of sort of shifting consciousness from the environment in which you're raised to suddenly being in environments where you're maybe in white institutions or mixed institutions, and sort of trying to reconcile those things. Pearl Clegg was on the last community conversation, talking a lot about the difference between her and some of her students, because she grew up in a completely Black environment, writing for Black audiences, thinking about Black institutions, and sort of her relationship to some of her students who maybe went right into kind of all white environments, or in you know, sort of higher learning institutions where they're sort of surrounded by, you know, sort of underneath a sort of white lens kind of immediately. So I'm kind of curious about if there are pressures you feel or not in terms of bridging the gap maybe in the American theater between your perspective and maybe an audience's perspective, or how married you feel to the bridging of that gap or not.
For me, I feel like my job as a dramatist and a writer is to put my lens on the audiences, like to make them see what I see in a certain sense. I mean, they obviously will meet it wherever they meet it, but like when I'm writing, I'm like trying to take something intangible, and invisible from the ether and like translate it into something that people can see and feel and hear. And I can only do that from my own understanding and the debates and arguments that I've been having with myself about whatever it is to create that intangible thing. And so the only thing that I really worry about is just making sure that I'm as able to make that intangible thing as tangible and as visible as possible so that everyone can see it. And they might not all see exactly the same thing in the same way, but like if I'm doing my work well, they'll all like meet it wherever they are and take it with them when they leave the theater. So that, like, I guess the short way of saying that is that like I don't really worry about, like, I'm aware of the fact that different people might perceive what I've created in certain ways, but I don't let it lead me astray from the work of putting what I see in front of them.
I was wondering, as I'm listening to all of you speak and reflecting on the piece, especially particularly the last line that Lorraine Hansberry says, when she says, "We washed your underwear, we know it's not clean," right? And that relationship to intimacy that you were just talking about, Claudia, this idea of, I'm curious to hear more about what intimacy then means to you, because I hear that and I think, oh, intimacy is almost about this vulnerability where you can't see my dirty laundry. I don't want you to see what's going on in here. Yet I think for many of us in the theater, it's almost, we're excited to see, how do they do it? How do people in different areas, what is being written about, presented, performed, so much can bring us closer because of that exposure in some ways. And so I was curious to hear just a little bit more about desire and intimacy and how that plays into your work.
I mean, for me, intimacy is sort of what happens at the kitchen table. It's the conversations that Hansberry says white people don't overhear in Black people, but that Black people, by virtue of being considered invisible in environments with white people allow them to overhear these things about their most intimate dealings. And so that gives Black people a lens onto white culture that white people don't have onto Black culture. But I think in my own work, in terms of working, I'm sort of, I liked Michael's use of the word, a kind of intangible thing that the audience then gets a lens into. And when I'm working, I'm trying for a kind of transparency into the vulnerability, the emotional, affective life of the characters I'm dealing with. And so how do you get the audience to step into that field of emotional vulnerability or frustration, or whether it's the white character, the Asian character, the Black character, doesn't really matter. But you're still dealing with people, and people who have been created inside this culture, which is incredibly racialized. So that's how the race comes in, but you're still moving through the bodies of very vulnerable, very frustrated, very pissed off, very needy people, you know? And so how do you make those moments, and we all know them when we see them, the feel like we own them, feel like we recognize them, and that they're incredibly transparent. Like it's so, you know, Yeats says, all the stitching and unstitching will be for naught if it doesn't seem a moment's thought. And so that's the work for me in the writing, to make it feel like you wrote it. You know, you took it I took it from you. Not that you're meeting me, but I took it from you.
Which brings up, that brings up what Casey, what you were speaking to a little bit about your work as well. How you're reflecting on your lens and your life and experience, and how that, how you're bringing that to the work, and how then therefore an audience is looking at it. Can you bring that to them? Can you speak a little bit more about that process and what inspires that in you, or continues to inspire that? Does that make sense?
Yeah. I'm really inspired in this conversation right now. Yeah. Michael, both your description of this like intangible thing that then becomes real. Like what I took from that is like, it becomes real in the room for the audience, and then that changes something. And same with what you're saying, Claudia, around like this, like if the audience can feel like this is my thing, what then happens when they walk out? And for me, I'm obsessed with that moment. Like this is our craft, like to stage this thing that doesn't exist yet. And then everyone is changed, the people who made it, the audience. And change is really, like, I feel really committed to that. I feel, so I'm always thinking about, and then I was also inspired by what you were saying, Michael, because in terms of like not being led astray by like this assumption about like where the audience might be and what they might need to like meet some work or something. That's what I was hearing a little bit. And I definitely feel like I have felt in that position as a queer person of like, oh, like my goal is to make something that queer and trans people feel like love and feel seen by, and that straight people understand this experience more, which is, I don't know how I feel about that now. Like, I don't know if I would take on that project now, and I have taken on that project. And like now I think about it a lot in terms of race and class, but like I just think we, like white people, Black people, people of color, Indigenous people, like we're all in really different conversations around race. We're all like with very different experiences around it, and experiences talking about it and feeling about it. And so I am thinking about like how to meet like everyone well in a room around in a way that interrupts white supremacy and like draws everyone like closer to each other, which feels complex, and that's like part of what I'm going for right now.
I'm curious, listening to you talk, and Casey and Claudia are both sort of touching on this a little bit, but I'm sort of curious about the theater sort of specifically. What are the things about the theater that give you more intimacy? Why the theater specifically for each of you as sort of a medium to investigate these things?
For me, the theater is just it's an expression of real life. It's where, you know, human emotions and fears and fantasies and, you know, the unsayable become sayable. And specifically, you know, I work in musical theater, and like music can like creep into all of the like the crevices that you normally can't get, that you can't totally get at in many other mediums. And so it just feels like the perfect vehicle in which to speak very intimately and very specifically about anything that you are thinking about or dreaming about or afraid of. And so for me, it just is the perfect vehicle for artistic expression.
Casey?
Okay, I will speak about why theater. I mean, yeah, the body, like and also the group are what draws me to the theater. I'm really inspired by this project that y'all are doing, like kind of repassing the language and of these amazing like thinkers, artists, activists, like through your bodies. And to bring them to a new collective in this moment, like, and that kind of, yeah, like I believe that change has to happen at the level of the body. And I feel like theater is for me, like the form that speaks to that the most. And also like the fact that we have to be together to experience it. And then it's really about like this, collective experience, like our individual experience within a collective, that feels really important. And like the possibilities there are different than when we're stuck in an individual experience, which I feel like reading a book or something. Yeah, and especially, and just specifically like in terms of like, yeah, like undoing white supremacy work, like for me, like a lot of that is important to look at individualism and really look for me, like myself as an individual and how I conceive of myself as an individual, and like really work to position myself like in an understanding as part of a collective. And so there's something in theater as a form that really already is pulling at that and undoing that kind of bubble that I can be in, at least.
I think, you know, Michael, you said expression of real life. I don't see the theater so much as an expression of real life. I see it as an expression of real bodies, in the sense that the limits of the actors become interesting to me in the theater, as well as the potential of what actors bring to the text. And as somebody who trained mostly as a writer, poet, and then moved to journalism and also essay writing, nonfiction writing, I find that I get very excited in the theater for two reasons. One, it's because and this is where real life does come in for me, because in real life, words only do 1/3 of the work. You know, things get done through language, but they also get done through gesture and through silence, and as you said, through the unsaid and all of this stuff. And you can write about it and describe it on the page, but you see it. You see those kinds of interactions on the stage. And that when I'm working on a play, I'm often thinking, how much of what I put on the page can I lose? Like that, and to go to what Casey said, the collaborative nature of working in theater is what is for me the most precious gift that I get when I move into that genre, because then all that writing seems like atmosphere that you can lose because the actor moves in and takes it, and it becomes part of their whole expression, how they move, what they, and so the words become what words are, an enabling of interaction, but not the whole of it. And so that's why, for me, the theater is sort of a magic place, and very different from what gets to be text-based.
Beautiful. Yeah. So, yeah. Thank you all so much.
I was gonna, Michael, you said this thing. You all said such beautiful things about our art form and sort of why it's so unique. Michael, you were listing just now like sort of a bunch of things that can happen sort of in the space of theater to make it so alive. And one of the words you used was fear. And I've been thinking a lot about fear this week because there's an episode of Lessons in Survival where there are two Mavis Nicholson interviews, one with Maya Angelou and one with James Baldwin. And both of them talk about fear. Sort of Mavis sort of says to Maya, like, talks about this amazing confidence she has. And Maya sort of jokingly says, like, oh, I'm always afraid. And I try to be brave anyway by sort of channeling all the people that I've ever loved and bring them on stage with me. And then James jokingly says the opposite and sort of says he's not afraid of anything. And then when she sort of presses him, he sort of says, well, there's nowhere to run, so you might as well run towards the thing that brings you fear, because at least you know what hits you. So I'm curious about your relationship to fear, if you feel comfortable talking about it, how fear does or doesn't impact your work. And I don't know if any of you have any ideas about that.
I guess for me, the fear, somebody once told me that they were quoting someone else or something else, and they once said, I might get this wrong, that anger is grief turned inward. And so I sort of like think about fear in some ways being like somewhat the opposite of that, and so like when I'm afraid of something, it's normally like the truth that I don't want to admit or that I don't want to touch. And so like I find that like I have to like really dig deep to find the actual thing or issue that is like that I'm dancing around that might paint me or seemingly paint me or my point of view in like an unfavorable light, and like drag it out into the sort of cold light of day in order to sort of exercise it from my body, and I find that those moments when you find them and are really able to sort of fully, skewer the beast in the cold light of day to be the most thrilling moments in the theater. Like there's a moment in A Strange Loop that was very hard for me to come to in writing, where there's this monologue that the main character Usher delivers to his father, where he sort of talks about not just that his anger at his father about how he talks to him about his homosexuality, but also that within that anger is this weird sort of feeling that if his father were in some other universe a gay man, that he wouldn't be attracted to him, and that he himself is devastated by that. And like I was very nervous about putting that that beast out into the cold light of day, and with all the implications that could come from such an expression of that truth for the character. But it also felt genuinely like a new idea, and like one that on some level I had been grappling with since I had come out when I was 17, and like had to tell my father that I was gay and see his gaze upon me, which at that time was great horror and disappointment and all of that. And yet I didn't know why I was so like devastated by it. Wasn't just that like he knew I was gay, it was like deeper than that. And so it took me many years to sort of synthesize what that fear was. It was that actually it had to do with like my own perception of my own desirability. Mm-hmm. And so, but pulling that out actually sort of helped me personally in my life, let alone, which is separate on some level from the character. It helped me sort of put in perspective like what I was afraid of and be able to sort of move to like a higher ground. Which to me, that's the kind of thing that I think that you can do in theater like the best. I mean, you can do it in other forms, in song or in, visual arts or whatever, but like just to say the words and have the characters hash it out and the conflict and the fray of it. To me, like I find that to be so thrilling and ideal.
Can I just, I mean, that is fascinating to me that the moment of recognition is the moment that one understands that the thing that you thought was the difference is not the difference. That it's not a question of having different sexualities that have to be, that have to coexist, but that actually this person is not a person you like anyway. And that is really interesting, that we have these narratives that we put in place that allow us to continue, and then we think, oh, if the person knows this thing about me, then I will know them, or then they would like me, or then we can move differently. But then you realize, no, if the person knows this thing about me, it doesn't make any difference because there's something else here that prevents and probably caused the fact that I wouldn't tell them the first thing in the first place. So that's lovely as a kind of moment to tease apart.
Yeah, he also says a line in there where he's like, I realized that if we wouldn't have been friends in high school.
Right, exactly.
And that was just like, it's like devastating to him to be like, oh, I love my dad, but we would not have been friends in high school.
Yeah, we are not the same people. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and the thrill of being able to watch that, like you said, Michael, watch those discoveries be made in real time for the space, so extraordinary.
Right, and processing those uncomfortable feelings, right, which happen in our bodies. I completely agree, and I think any commissary participant would agree with that. It's exactly the work that we're doing, as Casey, we were saying, it's processing through the body, and I'm hearing everyone on the panel speaking to this, that it is we are benefiting from, Michael, what you've discovered through your body, and we get to enact that and receive it as a theatrical piece, and also as performers particularly in this time, which is particularly challenging and full of fear, and finding ways to have community and to be in conversation through our bodies. This platform can be challenging to work through. The body, it feels like an impediment almost, yet somehow embracing this technical work, we're able to find an access point through the body. And it just, this desire, I love how we've come full circle, but Claudia, you were talking about desire earlier in intimacy, and this desire, I wouldn't desire from my father to be, even a friend, to date him or be a friend or anything, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where does that inform us all?
Mm-hmm.
I have to say that I desire fully to be in this room with all of you and even more, to spend even more time here. And I know that our time is coming to a little bit of a close, but Kyle.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to ask, I had sort of two quick questions, so sort of as we wrap up. We don't want to take too much of your time, but the first is sort of related to what Nicole was saying, is as this project was sort of birthed out of our desire to have community and feel closeness and to create something that sort of took this digital medium and somehow gave us the physical experience of being in the theater in some capacity, which the sort of channeling has really done for us. But I'm kind of curious about what creativity means to you in this time, with a pandemic, with the sort of surge of Black Lives Matter and the sort of second civil rights movement, with the political chaos. What has your creativity been in this time? Has it been a time of making things? Has it been a time of reflection or grief or abandoning that thing? I'm just curious about that for you guys. You all.
Casey?
Yeah, I mean, Claudia and I have been in conversation about this. Like, I've been struggling to make work during this time. And I think part of that, like thinking in advance of this conversation, like I think part of, part of it feels like, oh, the reasons that I care about making theater are like playing out around me, like so heavily that it feels like other action is called for. And then it also feels like I think about just like how to be in solidarity with Black people in struggle right now, with people of color in struggle, working class people in struggle right now, like in this moment of incredible suffering. And just like, and part of my commitment to do that, it has to do with my work and also as a writer and artist. And then part of it also has to do with like showing up in other ways, like, which I feel like can be particularly important for white people to do. Like, it feels like that to me, because it's like, just like it's important for us to be shaped by movements and be listening to like and educated by like what's going on. And so like I've felt pulled in that direction, and I'm struggling to show up in the same way to my work as I was before.
I think I felt a lot of fear in terms of I've had this sort of irrational fear. I mean, it's not irrational, but it's irrational in the sense that I don't know how to address it. That there is something I could be doing that I'm not doing. That this moment is a moment full of precarity in terms of, economic precarity, emotional precarity for people, all kinds. Housing precarity, and then I think obviously we write checks, we give money to this, that, and whatever, but there's also a sense to go back to this idea of the body, that in the before times of COVID, I had a sense that whatever else I did, I personally could bring myself to a thing. And help that thing, help that person, move that thing, carry that thing, cross that, with that, hold that, do that. And now, I'm a Black woman who had cancer, who doesn't want to go outside. I do go outside. I went for a hike this morning, but you know what I mean? Like I'm not running to New York unless it's a risk that I feel like I must take in that sense. And so, that's been I fear that there is a thing I could be doing that I'm not doing and that I'm not seeing, and that I don't have access to a person who could be asking me to do something within my capacities, as limited as they are. And so it's something I lie in bed and I think about it. I think about what is it that I'm missing in terms of my own capacities to help in this time.
And yet you're actually doing it right now. Interesting enough, right? In that I understand you're saying on a broader spectrum, and at the same time, we are so grateful for everything that you've brought, each one of you has brought to us, and grateful that we have a platform. Thank you, Vineyard Theater, for having these discussions and bringing this thought to who knows who at this point, that we're putting it out there for continued conversation.
I was gonna close, but with a really heavy question about asking for, or not a heavy question, but a big question about your vision for the future of the American theater. But we have a question from one of our company members, Victoria, who's watching, and I thought that this might be the perfect way to close out. And she asked, what has brought each of you joy this week? Something that has brought joy. I feel like it might be a nice way to go out.
I just started watching Murder, She Wrote for the first time last night. And I'd never seen it. Was a show that my mother always loved when I was growing up, but I just, for whatever reason, I never watched it. I never got into it.
At my grandparents' house too. Yeah. I don't know what that was about.
And I watched like the pilot episode of it, and it was just so wonderful. And it's just like, it reminded me of the kinds of ways of making television and telling stories that sort of fallen out of fashion. And I've been sort of just in general during this time looking back and trying to find those moments, because I do feel, and it somewhat ties in, Kyle, to the question you didn't ask about the theater world and what we want to see in the future, is that like, I have been thinking very much that like a lot of the sort of reckonings happening within the theater over the while are also, there's been a conversation that we have not been having about the actual work that is being made and how it is made, and like the actual sort of components of art making that are part and parcel of conversations about equality, diversity, inclusion, etc. And as I look back at a lot of, I mean, I know they're television shows, but as I look back at like a different pace of storytelling, at different kinds of characters that you used to encounter, the different topics that would come up, I started to think about whether there's become a little bit of homogeneity in the theater, not just in terms of like race or gender, but like literally the ideas that we're dealing with, and so I was inspired by just watching this, 1980s sitcom that just was telling stories in this different way of like, we also need to really like challenge ourselves on like how we tell our stories, and how like and the care with which we make containers for the ideas that we're grappling with in the theater. And so I felt a certain joyfulness in thinking about the potential to do that on an even deeper level in the future, a la Jessica Fletcher from Murder, She Wrote and Cabot Cove. So I know that doesn't sound like that goes together, but it was just like this profound thing that like came up in me. I was like, look at Angela Lansbury as this like murder mystery woman who's like solving murders wherever she goes. And like, there's something about that like I want to bring into my own work and like into like whatever I do in the theater in the future. Like I want to solve murder mysteries in the theater, but like in our life, like in the world. Like I want to be a Jessica Fletcher in my approach to theater making.
That brings me a lot of joy.
Yeah.
Anything else you guys want to throw in for joy spreading?
Borak?
Yeah. Oh my God. That,
I
yeah.
know. I don't think I've laughed so hard in a long time.
Oh, I'm with you on that. Oh my gosh, so good.
Totally. Casey?
My partner making me laugh. Yeah.
Yeah. So wonderful. Thank you all.
It's been so unbelievably profound. Thank you for your time, for your work, and your generosity of spirit. Really, really feel like I could talk to you guys for 6 hours. Really, really extraordinary.
Yeah. So we're so honored to have you. And I feel so lucky that tonight was my night that I got to host. So thank you so much. And just to our audience out there, again, if you want to continue the conversation, and we are tonight, we are having a screening of This Country Is My Problem. That's at 8:30 p.m. It's a conversation with Charlie Rose and Toni Morrison, and I want to say one more person. It's fantastic. Charlie Rose, Toni Morrison, and James Baldwin. So we're coming back to James Baldwin again. So we hope you can join us for that tonight. And we also, if you are interested in supporting organizations that are important to us and to our guests tonight, you can check out the Racial Imaginary Institute at the racialimaginaryinstitute.org. That'll also go into the chat. Also, Musical Theater Factory is another organization, and the Electoral Justice Project, the Movement for Black Lives Electoral Justice Project. So those links will be in the chat. We hope that you will lift them up as we would love to, and as our guests have been doing, so that we all may move and evolve into a better place for everybody, and for all of our bodies. So yes, all bodies. So thank you so much. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.